Earlier this year, me and my good friend Ocelot showed you guys 5 incredibly powerful and fun early game builds you can create in Elden Ring, helping those of you that may have picked it up over the Christmas period breeze through the game with only 30 minutes of setup. And since we're supposedly getting the tarnished edition of Elden Ring this year, I figured we would go through 5 more incredibly fun and overpowered early game builds so that when that releases on the Switch too, and we also get the DLC for the other platforms, these builds can hopefully provide again another level of fun to do a brand new playthrough. So let me show you what I've cooked up. Now, just before we actually jump into the builds, much like the previous video, I do just want to give you some general information about every single build. They are once again all going to be level 35 because we are once again using the Grail strat to ensure that we get enough levels, which will make literally every build level 35 if you kill that dragon, no matter what starting class you choose. So if you need to remind yourself on how we can make that happen, feel free to check out the previous video because that route and everything involved is discussed in that video, and a link of which will obviously be down in the description. But also all of the weapons are going to be a +4 variant if they are improved through somber smithing stones, and a +12 if they are improved through regular smithing stones. Quite simply, if you're going throughout your games, there are going to be graveyards and other enemies like the hot air balloons that you can pop that grant a large sum of runes. There's also just stones dotted about, especially in the Liurnia of the Lakes, where you can pick up a whole bunch of 2s and 3s for regular smithing, but with whatever extra cash you pick up from the graveyards and all the other enemies as well, you can then either take that money to EG, who is going to be located on the west side or sort of northwest of the Liurnia of the Lakes, as if you're going towards Carrier Manor, where he will actually sell you somber stones 1 through 4. So if you didn't pick up any, you can just buy all 4 of the stones from EG and then upgrade your somber weapon as you see fit. But more specifically with the regular smithing stones, if you actually make your way to Fort Hate, which is located right here, and also Fort Feroth, which is located in Caelid, you can then climb up to the top of those respective forts, picking up both halves of the medallion, which will give you access to the Dectus lift. This lift is actually quite near EG, just a little bit more north, and when you get there, you can obviously use the medallion to use said lift and gain access to Altus Plateau. Once you're here, you can then beeline it to the Altus Tunnel, which is located again right here. And once going inside, as soon as you enter just around to the right, there's going to be this chest, which do be careful, there will be some enemies in here that will try and attack you whilst you're opening the chest. But upon opening the chest and picking up the item inside, you will then receive the smithing bell bearing for smithing stones 3s and 4s. If you take this to the round table hold and give it to the twin maidens, you will then have the ability to purchase infinite amounts of smithing stone 3s and 4s, which alongside the smithing stones that you hopefully pick up on your route, which again is shown in the previous video, you should then be able to get your weapon to +12 in no time before you take on any bosses. So just know during the footage the weapons are going to be either +4 or +12, and of course the characters are going to be level 35. With all that said, I should probably now show you the builds, and the first one I want to show you revolves around a weapon called the Watchdog Staff. The Watchdog Staff is again something you can pick up almost instantly in your games, because if you head again west to the Liurnia of the Lakes, more specifically by the Minor Erd Tree, if you wrap around it to the side of the cliff, down the slope on that cliff face, you will then find the Road's End Catacomb. It's located right here on the map, and when you go inside, there's going to be 2 staircases that you will see instantly, one of which will have the lever that you need to pull in order to open the boss room. But if you jump past that and go down the second staircase, there will be 2 walls which can be hit or rolled into to reveal that they are illusionary walls. When they disappear, you will then see 2 bodies in the back left, with the furthest one at the back holding the Watchdog Staff. So all you need to do is come into this catacomb, pick up the weapon. You can then leave or choose to fight the boss, it's entirely up to you. But when you've got this weapon, you now have a really fun colossal weapon with a unique Ash of War. Just to quickly explain how the weapon works, it is only scaling with strength and dexterity. However, the Ash of War is the sorcery of the Crozier, which is pure magic damage, but where the weapon does not have an intelligence scaling, you cannot improve this particular attack through your intelligence stats. The only way that you can improve the skill power on the weapon is by increasing the weapon's level, along with some other buffs of course, but as I say, you do not put any point into intelligence because intelligence will not improve this particular skill. But by improving this weapon to a +4, because it is a somber weapon, you will still be doing a decent amount of damage with that Ash of War, because what it does is it spawns 8 orbs of magic, which will then hone in like a homing missile, heading towards the middle of your enemy's hitbox. Key things to note about this is they always go for the middle of the hitbox, like they don't go for the head if you're aiming for the head on something like a dragon. This attack is tailored to specifically hit the enemies in the middle, but also enemies only input read the cast of this attack. So if you hit your Ash of War button, or LT or L2, the initial sort of like wind up where you do spawn in the orbs will be input read by enemies and NPCs, but when the actual orbs go to attack, because there is a little bit of a delay, enemies will not input read that. So basically against NPCs, this is a perfect roll catching move, which you can then mini stagger them and then hit them with the actual weapon itself, so you can do a bunch of true combos with this, but equally against bigger enemies you can just spam it because it does have a decent range. But again, if enemies get up close and personal to you, it is a colossal weapon which does a ton of stance damage, 45 points worth of stance damage just to be clear, with a charged heavy, and the Ash of War actually does 1.5 points worth of stance damage per orb. So if you combo in one use of the Ash of War and a charged heavy, you're doing 57 points worth of stance damage, which if you do that twice successfully will break the stance of a lot of bosses in this game, meaning you can get a lot of critical hits. Now of course I'm just going to throw up the stats and also some suggestive talismans and wonder physics, so again forgive me, some of these on here are not going to be early game friendly, like the Shard of Alexander and maybe the Magic Scorpion Charm, but you can definitely get your hands on the Magic Shrouding Crack tier, which will buff the damage with the Ash of War because it is purely magic damage, but we can also equally make use of the Axe Talisman and the Spiked Crack tier to help with those charged heavy attacks, which will help you deal the damage that you're seeing on screen. Obviously mix that in with the stats that you can see, so 25 Vigor, 15 Mind, 15 Endurance, 23 Strength, 10 Dexterity, 7 Intelligence, 8 Faith and 11 Arcane, and you'll have a build at level 35 doing hundreds of damage with every swing of the weapon. We did start with the Hero class, just to let you know, so then that way we had a good amount of Endurance, a good amount of Strength off the rip. And you're probably wondering though, hang on a second Jazza, why is there only 23 Strength in the build when the weapon actually requires 34 Strength? Well, luckily for us, there is a mechanic in the game where if you two-hand the weapon, so hold the weapon with both hands on your character, it essentially applies a 50% buff to your strength stat, allowing you to obviously then wield the weapon, because half of 23 is 11.5, and even if it's rounded down to say 11, that is still going to be 34. So you want to be holding the weapon with both hands at all times to 1, be able to use the Ash of War, and 2, do the most damage possible at this early stage. Again, feel free to grab those other talismans that I've suggested on screen at a later date, and you'll be doing even more damage with this. Obviously upgrade it as you progress through the game, and you'll have a very fun bonk stick, which also has decent range, allowing you to whittle down your enemies, but then also hit them with some heavy stance breaks, leading to some critical hits and leading to ultimately a whole lot of fun. But if for whatever reason a colossal weapon isn't your type of weapon, because maybe it's a little bit too slow, I've actually got something that's a little bit faster but just as deadly for you, because for the second build we're going to be revolving that around the Claymore. Yes, another classic in the FromSoft series. The Claymore is a fantastic great sword that again can be picked up as soon as you load up your game, because if you head to the most south part of the map, so heading towards Castle Morn in the Weeping Peninsula south of Limgrave, you can then take the lift up into Castle Morn, but hang right running past the Misbegottens, to which in this room there will be another chest with the Claymore residing inside. This Claymore does side a little bit more into your strength stat, but is a perfect quality weapon at the beginning of the game, but more importantly it comes with one of the most broken and best Ashes of Wars that you can get in the entire game. That is of course Lion's Claw. The beautiful thing about Lion's Claw is if you're not really great at the game, so if you are actually picking this up for the first time and looking for an early build that can basically let you get through anything, Lion's Claw gives you hyper armor whilst you're using the move, so basically you cannot be staggered out of it and your attack will always go through any enemy's attack. The only thing to note with this is you will be taking extra damage, as it will be counter attack damage you receive whilst using Lion's Claw, but if you get hit before or slightly after, then you'll just take the regular damage. So this is going to be a trading move most of the time, unless you're using it as a finisher if you know an enemy is close to having their stance broken, or you're using it within a window that you know 110% you do have time to use this and then get back out, which some of the early bosses do give you plenty of time to do that. But it's also a great sword, so does a good amount of base damage on its own, and again with the charged heavies you actually do a thrusting motion which deals pierce damage, so much like how I was just saying, when you're attacking and an enemy hits you, you receive additional damage. If the enemy's attacking and you hit them with that thrusting move, you will do additional damage because it's pierce damage. Pierce damage is also one of the best damage types in the game too, so not only do you have one of the best Ashes of Wars, you've actually got one of the best moves in general to use on a greatsword that does a good amount of damage. And if you want a comparison in terms of stance damage to the colossal weapon, the charged poking attacks that do the pierce damage do 36.3 stance damage, so only about 9 less than the previous colossal weapon, and also it swings a bit faster. And Lion's Claw on this weapon also does 33 stance damage, so if you're using the heavy attacks and the Ash of War a lot, you're also going to be breaking stances a lot. And specifically with Lion's Claw, when you come up against NPCs or humanoid enemies like the Misbegottens or even Renala, if you successfully hit those enemies with Lion's Claw, you'll also be flattening them, meaning you can just keep them stun locked or keep them in a constant loop of getting back up, getting flattened, getting back up again to receive yet another Lion's Claw. So it's very new player friendly because you can get away with a lot, and obviously here are the stats to wield it and get the best use out of this weapon early. So again, we're starting with the hero class, so we've got 25 health, 9 mind, 15 endurance, 26 strength with 13 dexterity in order to wield the weapon, before then 7, 8 and 11 in intelligence, faith and arcane. And again, kind of similar to the previous build, you can rely on things like the axe talisman, but you can also then get yourself the spear talisman as well to help with the specific pierce damaging counter attacks. But again, in the Wonder Physic you can put the strength knot tier in there nice and early, as well as the spiked crack tier to help with those charge attacks once again. So again, this is yet another fun strength build that's, like I say, probably a bit more friendly to those newer players compared to the previous build. But of course, those two were predominantly strength builds, so we're now actually going to move on to a build that revolves around a different stat, and that's going to be dexterity, because the next build uses none other than the Nagakiba, possibly the best katana in the entire game. It's unfortunately something that you have to get early by killing one of my favorite NPCs, Yura. So if you come to this location in Agil Lake, there's going to be like a broken structure, and camping out underneath it is going to be Yura himself, and you will have to defeat him here in order to get this weapon. It's actually relatively easy if you start with the samurai class and make use of the Uchi katana with its unsheath ability, because you can hit him twice before he becomes aggravated and becomes an enemy, allowing you to take him down to basically half health before he even starts attacking you. Once defeating Yura, he'll then drop the Nagakiba that we're looking for, but the build we're going to be using with the Nagakiba also requires 2 other items. One of them is going to be the Ash of War we're going to put on this bad boy, which is going to be Stormblade, and that can be obtained by speaking to Bernal, who is residing in the War Master's Shack, which again is located just here. But then for our second item, we're also going to want to pick up Blood Flame Blade. This is located just sort of northwest from the Blood Church, which is the structure right here in the Lernia of the Lakes, and there will be a golden scarab you need to take down. Luckily there's not really any enemies nearby, so you can just kind of walk up to this golden scarab either on torrent or on foot and take it down to then get the Blood Flame incantation. And then once you put on the Ash of War and get yourself any seal, so you can use the incantations, we now have a blood-flamed Nagakiba with Stormblade on it, meaning we can do a lot of bleed procs and a lot of physical damage in very quick succession. As you'll see in most of the footage, I am using the Ash of War as much as possible, whilst also making sure I'm standing basically on top of the enemies whilst using it, because as you should also hopefully be seeing, if you do that, you do hit the enemies twice, because Stormblade does send out a storm projectile at your enemies, but if you're on top of them, you will hit them with that whirlwind effect, as well as the physical weapon, making use of the Blood Flame Blade that we put on to deal the extra bleed build up, because with Blood Flame Blade and why it's so important, you actually get an extra 40 points worth of blood loss. So with the Nagakiba you were doing 45 innate bleed build up, but with the Blood Flame Blade you're now doing 85 bleed build up per hit. So you're doing extra damage by hitting them with a physical weapon and also getting those bleed procs in, but you're also going to be doing 10.7 points worth of stance damage if you hit them with both the storm and the physical weapon. And again, much like the Claymore that we just talked about, the charged heavy with the Nagakiba is also a poking piercing move. That charged heavy also does 33 points worth of stance damage, so again is actually quite heavy hitting. So if you want to mix in ranged attacks with Stormblade or get on top of them as much as you can with a whole bunch of charged heavies, this weapon can also break stances really quickly, but ideally you want to be making use of the blood loss on the enemies that can be bled, as this just trivializes the game. But in order to make all of that happen, here are the stats and everything, and we do start off as a samurai class, so make sure you choose samurai at the beginning, and then essentially put points into vigor to make that 25, points into dexterity to make that 22, and increase your faith and arcane to 12 and 10 to make use of the Blood Flame Blade. The reason why we don't touch strength, even though the Nagakiba does require 18 strength in order to wield it, is it's very similar to the Watchdog staff that we talked about in the first build, where if we two-hand the weapon, we actually meet that strength requirement, meaning that we can get the best damage out of this and use the Ash of War correctly. So again, with this particular build, just make sure you're two-handing the weapon at all times so that you meet the 18 strength requirement. But of course, you can rely on Wonder Physic tiers like the Strength and Dexterity tier, as well as some talismans like the Axe Talisman if you do want to make use of the charged heavies, but equally the Winged Sword Insignia, which is located in the Learning of the Lakes as well, whilst also mixing in maybe some other talismans that help with physical damage, because the storm attack that you're doing with Stormblade is just pure physical damage. So the Blue Dancer Charm, if you want to run the risk and not have any armor on, you can actually get a really high buff with the Blue Dancer Charm if you want to grab that early too. But there's certainly a few ways you can take this build, either relying on the charged heavies to then punish their enemies, or just go strictly DPS to cause as many blood losses as possible. But again, if you're tired of the usual blood loss and big bonk builds, this next one is probably something a little bit more different, or at least may not necessarily be such an obvious choice, because for the fourth build we are going to be going over the Dragon Communion spells. Things like Dragon Maw and Dragon Claw are absolutely disgustingly strong, especially in the early game, because they can do literally 1,000 damage or more with a very simple setup, as I'm showing you on screen right now. And again, both spells do a monstrous amount of stance damage, making most bosses immobile and making you feel like the actual boss. Again, if you use the method to kill Grail at the beginning to then obviously get the runes to allow you to get to level 35, you also get enough Dragon Hearts to be able to go and buy these incantations from the Dragon Communion Church, which is actually in the south of Caelid. I'm just going to show you the location right now. The reason why I'm pointing this one out is because you do not need to kill anybody or any bosses to get here. There is one in Limgrave, but you do need to go through the Seaside Cave, which does require beating a boss. So although it's a little bit more tricky, or at least more dangerous to come to Caelid, you can actually get here again by running around on Torrent and avoiding the majority of the enemies. So if you just stick to the path and run south to Caelid to this location, you can get here pretty easily and get yourself possibly the best Dragon Communion spells from the very beginning. But once you've got both Dragon Maw and Dragon Claw Claw from the Dragon Communion Church, there is one other item you can also go and get, which is going to be the seal we're going to be using, the Dragon Communion Seal. This is actually located in the Stranded Graveyard. Now, you do need 2 Stone Sword keys to gain access to this area, one of which can be found right next to the Storm Hill Shack site of grace. It's on like this body, on like the little structure next to the building. So that one is a very easy pickup. And then again, you can either find one out in your travels, or if you actually go to the 2 Finger Maiden shop in the Round Table Hold, they also sell them for a fairly low price. And then once you've got 2 Stone Sword keys, you can come here, open this fog gate, and find yourself the Dragon Communion Seal. I'm going to kind of like speed up the path, so feel free to obviously slow it down in the play if you need to follow along step by step. But basically, we need to avoid this chariot that's going up and down the ramps. You can use basically the gaps in the walls on the side to avoid it going up and down and then running as soon as it's gone past you. But if we follow the 2 ramps that go down, we can then hang left and then go back up. On the next ramp is going to have a banished knight kneeling over a dead body. Defeating the knight here will then grant you with the Dragon Communion Seal, which is going to be our catalyst to use the spell. So the reason why this is important is because this particular seal actually gives you a 15% buff to the Dragon Communion spells you can buy from the church, just simply by having that seal on your character. So it's a free 15% buff, and it's also a somber weapon, so you can improve it to +4 nice and easily too. Dragon Maw is the more costly spell, but also does the most damage, and also does 45 points of stance damage. Yes, it's a lot, but if you want to use Dragon Claw because it's a little bit more cost efficient, that also does a large amount of damage and does 30 points worth of stance damage. So if you want to mix and match, maybe hit them with 1 or 2 claws to then finish off with a Dragon Maw, that will be more than enough to break most bosses' stances, to which then you've got a free hit of your choice to either do another Dragon Claw or another Dragon Maw. And as you're hopefully seeing on screen right now, the damage itself is just, yeah, it's ridiculous. So here are the stats and everything you need to make that happen for yourself. And of course, the starting class of this was the Prophet, but as you can see, we've got 24 points into HP, 14 mind, 8 endurance, 11 strength, 10 dexterity, 7 intelligence, then 24 faith and 16 arcane to allow us to use the spells, because the 24 faith and 16 arcane is the minimum requirement for Dragon Maw itself, which equally also is enough to allow us to use Dragon Claw. And then I must say, once you've upgraded the seal to +4, that's all you really need to do. And again, these are physical damaging moves, so if you want to use things like the Blue Dancer Charm, you can do. These particular spells do not charge, so things like Godfrey's Icon will not help out this spell, but you can obviously use some of the Faith Talismans, like the Faith Heirloom and obviously the Phlox Canvas Talisman and things like that boost incantations. And then you can obviously use the Faith tier in the Wonder Physic as well to boost your damage off the rip. Maybe put a defensive tier in there like the Bubble tier you can pick up quite early, or possibly a Stamina Regen tier just to give you a little extra boost coming in and out of the animations. But honestly, if you haven't tried the Dragon Communion spells yet, definitely give them a go, because they're a whole lot of fun and deal a whole lot of damage. But as much as these 4 builds have been incredible so far, that's exactly what can be said for the final build in this video, because for the 5th and final build, we're going to revolve that around the Frozen Needle. Yes, you heard me correctly, the Frozen Needle. I know it is a little bit tricky to get, so I am going to say that right now. If you're looking to get the Frozen Needle, you do actually need to head right next to E.G., because in the ruins next to him, you can go underground and fight a Royal Revenant. This is going to be tough for new players. I know, right? This is supposed to be an early game build, but you can use things like the Unsheath on the Uchi Katana, maybe level that up a little bit first to take on the Royal Revenant, because that does a lot of stance damage and can allow you to do a bunch of critical hits, or possibly even go and get yourself an incantation like Heal, because healing spells actually damage the Royal Revenant. I know, crazy. So you can do one of those 2 things. That should make it a hell of a lot easier, because once you beat this Royal Revenant, the door that he's guarding reveals a chest, which lo and behold inside that chest is indeed the Frozen Needle. The Frozen Needle is a unique thrusting sword that has again a unique charged heavy where it actually shoots a projectile of ice at your enemies. This projectile you shoot is pure magic damage, but does not get affected by things like the Axe Talisman or Spiked Crack tier because it's considered a projectile as opposed to being like a charged heavy, but it does do 60 points worth of frost buildup as well as the weapon itself. And talking about the weapon itself, that is just pure physical damage. There is no intelligence scaling again, so much like the first weapon we talked about that also has a magic based attack within it, because it does not have an intelligence based scaling naturally with the weapon, you cannot boost the frost buildup or the damage of the magic based projectile by increasing your intelligence. That is going to be boosted by the AR of the weapon and also by upgrading the weapon itself. Because there's no intelligence scaling, the base weapon is actually just pure physical and again is a thrusting sword, so has a lot of piercing moves. It also comes with Impaling Thrust, which is a fantastic move to close the distance on enemies while still doing 24 points worth of stance damage. But realistically, the idea with this weapon is to keep prodding at your enemies, cause that frost proc, which can happen quite quickly because it's a very nimble weapon, hitting multiple times in quick succession, to then unleash Impaling Thrust to potentially get a stance break and deal some good critical damage. But realistically, this weapon is about DPS. A lot of people don't like it because obviously the charged heavy is that projectile, so you are getting rid of like a standard charged heavy for a projectile that doesn't really do much stance damage and actually has very small range. But Impaling Thrust kind of makes up for that in a way, in my opinion, and it's also just a really cool weapon to try out from the very beginning and is more than capable of taking you the entire way through the game because again is pure physical damage against enemies that are normally obviously strong against magic. You would probably think this is really bad, but the actual weapon itself is physical, so it's transferable damage against literally everybody. As I've also mentioned throughout this video multiple times, pierce damage is one of the best damage types in the game because whenever an enemy is attacking or winding up an attack, you get additional damage whilst you hit them during those animations. And of course, when you frost an enemy, not only do you take away a chunk of their health bar, but they actually get 20% extra damage taken whilst frostbitten, meaning you do 20% extra damage whilst they're frozen. So there is a lot of ways to actually buff the damage output of this weapon really simply, one of which is using the talismans I'm throwing up on screen right now, but it does scale best out of dexterity, so also pairing all of this together, make sure you choose the samurai class once again for this particular weapon. Then as you can see, we've delved into 20 vigor this time before then getting 15 endurance and 30 dexterity. All of the other stats we do not touch. I was just looking to get the best damage out of this weapon possible, so we are delving a little bit more into the attacking stats with this build. But again, if you feel like you need a little bit extra health, feel free to take 5 points out of dexterity and put them into health. That's going to be absolutely fine. And then for future talismans, you can look for things like Millicent's Prosthesis, the winged insignias in the game to help with the DPS buffs. Again, don't worry about any magic based buffs with this particular weapon because you kind of want to focus on the physical damage and basically use the projectile sort of as and when you can to maybe cause a little bit more frost proc, using that charge heavy still on top of your enemies by hitting them with the projectile and the weapon itself. And although this weapon maybe isn't the best on this list, it's definitely a lot of fun taking down bosses, making them look weak with a weapon that a lot of people disregard and don't really talk highly of because there's obviously so many better options out there. But the Frozen Needle can definitely hold its own. Like I say, the Impaling Thrust is a good Ash of War. The constant procking away at your enemies with the Frostbite is a nice added touch, and it's just a really solid weapon. But these builds are more than capable of helping you beat the early game bosses, so that's things like Margit, Renala, Godric, all of which you should be seeing in this gameplay. And if you ever need to level up, again, these weapons will help you get through pretty much every catacomb, cave, and like dungeon available in the surrounding areas in Limgrave and the Learning of the Lakes, meaning you can definitely get to like level 60, 70 pretty damn easy. Obviously delving more into the stats that we've talked about, improving the dexterity and strength and health, allowing you to survive a lot easier and breeze through the game, and of course upgrade your weapons when you find more stones. So hopefully this video has done its job and shown you the potential of these weapons, because this isn't even 20% of what these weapons can do. So definitely let me know if you give any of these builds a try, because I'd love to know if you guys are trying these builds or if you've tried them in the past and can also share your thoughts and feelings on them, and share maybe any improvements you found in the comments below. Obviously get involved down there if you do. Also, I will have linked in the description sort of like the final builds for each one, so if you are looking for like a final build, you're looking for the end game, those links will be down there for the respective builds, so then you know what to work towards for the very end. Hopefully you have enjoyed this video, and if you have done, I hope you don't mind me asking you just to do the YouTube thing of leaving a like rating down below, because not only is that the quickest way to tell me you've actually enjoyed this video, but it also helps out the channel, so that will be greatly appreciated. And if you want to stick around for more Elden Ring content, obviously Night Rain bosses are coming out thick and fast. I'm looking to try to do more videos like this, going over even more fun builds in base ER at the same time, so there's plenty of content coming your way. Make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any of it. We are also now live streaming over on Twitch as well as YouTube, so again, self-promoting myself here. If you want to follow me on Twitch, that will also be linked down below, but again, if you're subscribed, you'll also be notified about any live streams that happen too. But now that I've sold my soul to you, that is everything that I need to say for this video, guys. Go and have an immense amount of fun with these builds. Let me know how you get on if you do happen to use them, but I guess for now, I'll catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.